Okay, we are very fortunate today here at Tenafly High School to have a very special guest, Mr. Stephen Ujifusa. He is the author of the book, A Man and His Ship, and he'll be talking to you today about the SS United States, which is currently docked in Philadelphia. I want to take a moment to mention here that the event is sponsored by Tenafly Educational Foundation, and we would like to thank all the special guests, Superintendent Traeger, the press, Ms. Susan Marinoff, all people, all staff, all students, you're all welcome. Also, I'd like to mention a little bit about Stephen. Stephen serves on the Advisory Council of the SS United States Conservancy. He has a master's degree in historic preservation and real estate from the University of Pennsylvania. He has a bachelor's degree from Harvard. And we would like to collect the passes if you have those from your teachers at the end. So if you do have a pass, please hang on to that, and we will collect those at the end of the period. And that's pretty much it. So without any further delay, Mr. Stephen Ujifusa.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's a real privilege to be here. Thank you to David DiGregorio for inviting me here today. And it's a real privilege to talk to a group of high school students. And a question I have for you is, how many of you, when you want to grow up, either want to design or build something? Design or build something? Okay, that's good. I was a little worried. William Francis Gibbs, who I'm going to be talking to you about today, he was someone who wanted to do something. He wanted to build ships. He wanted to build what was at the most technologically advanced thing possible. He was born in 1886. His parents said, don't do that, you can't make a living. And Gibbs spent a lot of his life telling them, basically proving to them that they were wrong, he could do what he wanted to do. He wanted to be the world's greatest naval architect. And I'd like to start off with a short video about William Francis Gibbs, who in many ways was like Steve Jobs. He was a college dropout. He was a bit of a strange guy. He was picked on when he was in high school and college, but he overcame being shy. He overcame being bullied and became recognized as one of the greatest designers and engineers in American history. William Francis Gibbs is one of the great American builders of all time. He was born in Philadelphia in 1886. At the age of 8, he saw this beautiful ship roar down the ways and splash into the Delaware River, and he said, from that moment, I knew I wanted to be a naval architect. The SS United States was finished in 1952. He spent 40 years of his life in pursuit of a really magnificent dream, creating the finest, fastest ocean liner in the world. These engines could develop 240,000 horsepower plus. So imagine a structure the size of the Chrysler Building turned on its side and going through the ocean, the North Atlantic, at over 40 miles per hour. She took the transatlantic speed record in the Queen Mary with a crossing time of 3 days, 10 hours, and 40 minutes. That was a huge symbol of international prestige of a time when America was truly on top of the world. The ship was totally American-built from top to bottom. At its capacity, the SS United States could carry 2,000 passengers and 1,000 crew members. So there were legions of people there to attend to the passengers' needs. We had students going abroad, people immigrating over from Europe. She was not just a passenger liner, she was also built to be a weapon in the Cold War that could carry 14,000 soldiers and could steam 10,000 miles without refueling. But what happened was the jet passenger aircraft arrived in 1958. The plan is for the ship to be turned into a stationary attraction, but if there's no real estate deal, by November of 2012, Lenfest funding will run out and the ship will get sold for scrap. Someone once asked William Francis Gibbs, do you love that ship more than your wife? And he said, you're 1,000% correct. That really fascinated me, how someone could be that devoted to a creation. For me, it's a story of American achievement. It's a story of One man following his passion and sticking with it. And I think it's a real lesson for today's society.
How many of you have flown across the Atlantic to Europe? How long does it take? 6 hours, 7 hours. Well, there was a time maybe about 50 years ago when there were no planes that flew across the Atlantic. You had to go across the Atlantic by ship. And the SS United States, when it came out in 1952, was the fastest passenger ship to cross the Atlantic. That was a time when that mattered. But only 6 years after the SS United States entered service, the first jet plane enters service and renders this ship and all the technology that went into it obsolete. But for its time, it truly was one of the great technological marvels of the world. He was asked, William Francis Gibbs, do you love the ship more than your wife? This is William Francis Gibbs greeting his ship on the Hudson River, not too far from here, on a cold fall morning in October of 1957. This is when probably your parents were children, or just about when they were born. And he truly was in love with this wonderful ship, which was 3 football fields long, bigger than the Titanic, much faster, and much safer. A lot of people have connections to this ship, even though she's been out of service since 1969. This is my grandmother and my grandfather, Joseph and Judith Folman of New Rochelle, New York, boarding the SS United States around 1960. And this ship carried over 1 million passengers during her 17 years of service and 400 trips across the Atlantic. So my grandparents were typical of the sort of people that travel on the ship. They came people from all walks of life, immigrants, millionaires, movie stars, royalty, you name it, traveled on this ship. William Francis Gibbs was born in Philadelphia in 1886 to a very wealthy family. His father had made a fortune in railroads and gas lines. And William Francis Gibbs was brought up to be a proper young Philadelphia gentleman, but he didn't want to be that. He did not want to be a lawyer, as his parents wanted him to be. From the time he was very young, he wanted to design ships. He was constantly building, drawing ships, doodling. He was picked on in high school. He was not a particularly good athlete. The only sport he was good at was tennis. He showed up, he ended up coming to Harvard in 1906, and he did not do very well there. But the really defining event of his life was when he was a senior at Harvard, when his father lost his entire fortune, millions and millions of dollars. William Francis Gibbs had to drop out of college. For him, this was an extremely shameful thing. His family's reputation was really suffered because of that. But he would later say, if not for the fact that if my father had not gone bankrupt, I never would have amounted to anything in life. It gave me the drive to achieve on my own. So in 1913, he ends up getting a job with a very famous admiral, Admiral David Taylor, who teaches William Francis Gibbs everything he needs to know to become a naval architect. Gibbs does so well that he ends up on the cover of Time magazine in 1942 for his design work. And here he is on the on the deck of one of his passenger ships. He wore very crummy clothes. His shoes were cracked. He had a very bad mouth. Someone liked to say that he had the voice, the diction of a Philadelphia aristocrat, but the mouth of a sailor. He really made his name for himself designing warships during World War II. He designed some of the finest vessels in the world that helped us defeat Japan and Germany during World War II. He also designed a ship called the Liberty Ship. This was a very simple cargo ship that basically carried men and material all over the world during the war and helped turn the tide against the Axis powers. But Gibbs really wanted to design transatlantic luxury liners. These ships were the technological, the pride of nations during the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. And the big prize that these ships went after was something called the Blue Riband of the Atlantic. This was the transatlantic speed record. Britain, France, Germany built bigger and faster and more luxurious ships to capture this prize and also to get passengers. Well, as you might know, a lot of things went wrong with a lot of these ships. I need not mention the Titanic. I'm sure most of you have seen the movie. You might have learned about the Lusitania from your history class. She was the ship that, when she was sunk in 1915, helped bring America into World War I. But Gibbs's biggest fear was fire. Fire at sea, he felt, was the most dangerous thing that could happen because the passengers and crew are trapped. Gibbs finally got his chance to design his superliner, his 1,000-foot-long ship, right after World War II, when the U.S. government offered a gigantic subsidy to build a ship that could be turned into a troop transport in time of war. If you might recall from your World War II history classes, during the D-Day buildup, we had to send millions of men across the Atlantic to invade France, Nazi-occupied France. Well, we didn't have planes back then to do that. We had to do that with ships. Most of the ships that carried our troops to World War II in Europe were converted passenger ships. So the U.S. government realized we don't have a ship like this of our own to carry troops. So Gibbs said, I'm going to be the person to design a ship that could be turned into a ship that could sail from San Francisco to Asia, 10,000 miles and back without refueling. Could carry 15,000 soldiers. That's an entire army division. So this was a true military masterpiece. And she would be designed to sustain the same damage that sank the Titanic 30 years before. Any 5 of her 20 watertight compartments could be flooded. She would also be designed to be as fireproof as possible. Almost no wood would be used in her construction. And her upper decks would be built of aluminum, not steel, to save weight. The engines that were used to propel the SS United States were a type of engine known as steam turbines. These engines were later used on our first aircraft carriers and also on our battleships like the battleship New Jersey, which is currently docked in Camden. These engines operate a lot like a windmill. You have basically something that's lined with a lot of blades, and very hot steam is blasted against it, and that turns the rotor and turns the propeller. These engines could develop 240,000 horsepower. Now, to put that in perspective, a very good car develops 300 horsepower. So these were the most powerful engines ever put in a passenger ship. This shows sort of the scale of construction. The ship's construction started in 1950 and cost $78 million. To put that in today's money, that's about $1 billion today. $50 million of that was paid for by the federal government. These funnels are over 60 feet high, and those are 10 1950 Fords lined up against it. This is the ship being floated out of dry dock. She was built in Newport News, Virginia. She was constructed in dry dock and floated out of dry dock. The reason why was that this ship was everything below the waterline. The hull shape, the engines, the propellers were considered classified military secrets because of this ship's use, potential use, as a wartime troop transport. William Francis Gibbs said, Joe Stalin would love to see the inside of the ship, but he's not going to get any close. There are going to be no pictures published of the ship's hull below the waterline or the engines. Now, if you have a ship that is supposed to be as fireproof as possible, you can't use any wood. So the interiors of the ship were very plain compared to older passenger ships. You had a lot of plastics, you had a lot of steel and aluminum and glass. And one thing that is very foreign to us today, if you've been on a cruise ship today, you have one class. You can go wherever you want on the ship for the most part. Well, back then, in the 1950s, there were 3 separate and very unequal classes: first, cabin, and tourist, and where you got to sleep depended on how much you'd pay. If you were traveling first class, a ticket would cost in today's money anywhere from around $4,000 to $10,000 per person one way across the Atlantic. Very expensive. This was a holdover from the Titanic era. If you've seen the movie, the ship had 3 classes, and steerage and first class and second class there was vast differences in how nice they were. Cabin class was located in the stern of the ship, above the propellers, still very, very nice. One thing that cabin class passengers had, which was remarkable for second class passengers of the time, was private bathrooms. Imagine paying that much for a cabin back then and having to go down the hall to use the bathroom or use the shower. Well, that was very common back then. The SS United States was the first ship to offer private bathrooms, or one of the first to offer private bathrooms for second-class passengers. Now, if you get seasick, you don't want to be in tourist class. That's in the front of the ship. Now, if you know anything about, if you remember from your physics classes, you get the most motion from up here when a ship is going up and down through the ocean. So if you do get seasick, you would feel the most motion here. And unlike today's cruise ships, which have stabilizers, fins that jet out and help stabilize the ship, the SS United States did not have those. She came out before those were invented. So even a ship that was 3 football fields long would roll in some of the worst North Atlantic weather. This ocean has been described as the most dangerous in the world. Icebergs during the winter, gales, hurricanes. As one captain said about being a captain on the North Atlantic, he said, "Show me the captain of a transatlantic liner and I'll show you a religious man. Out there, you have to believe. Imagine waves 12 stories high coming right at you." The maiden voyage, which took place in July of 1952, was a major media event. Everyone was hoping that the SS United States would take the record away from a British ship called the Queen Mary, which had held the transatlantic speed record for 14 years. And her record was just over 3 days and 20 minutes across the Atlantic. An American-built passenger ship had not held the record since 1853. So everyone was hoping that this ship would take the record away. When she set sail from New York, from the west side of Manhattan, on July 3rd, 1952, the ship was fully booked. You had a lot of celebrities on board. You had the granddaughter of Franklin Roosevelt on board. You had the daughter of the President of the United States on board. This was Margaret Truman. So she was fully booked, and William Francis Gibbs, shown here, was terrified of something going wrong. Usually ships did not go for the transatlantic record on their first voyage because the crew still was learning, the ship's machinery wasn't broken in yet. Well, Commodore Harry Manning, who is shown here on the right, he was not the sort of guy to be told, "Don't go very fast." He knew what the ship could do, and as soon as the ship cleared New York Harbor, he gunned it with 2,000 passengers on board. And by the first day, the ship is doing 34 knots. That's about 36 miles per hour. By the second day, she's doing 35. Third day, she's doing almost 37. So imagine something that big going close to over 40 miles per hour through the Atlantic. If you're on a ship like that, that's extremely fast, and faster than anything that had gone across the Atlantic before as a passenger ship. Well, on July 7th, 1952, as people are partying and dancing in the ship's ballrooms, the ship sweeps past the southwest coast of England and captures the transatlantic speed record with a time of 3 days, 10 hours, and 40 minutes, beating the Queen Mary's best time by 10 hours, the largest margin in history. And the ship, when she comes into England the next day, she stops in France first, then arrives in Southampton, England. This is a major media event. Reporters from all over the world are commenting on what a spectacular achievement this is. William Francis Gibbs, when he is being interviewed by the British press, says, "It has just been a tremendous honor to have the hopes and aspirations of our great nation embodied in this ship." When Commodore Harry Manning, the captain of the SS United States, is being interviewed, by the press. He says, "I don't understand what the big deal is. We were only doing 2/3 power." The British did not like that. Commodore Harry Manning is fired on the second voyage because he'd raced another ocean liner. Back then, if you were going to pass another ship, you did not do that you were supposed to do it at a respectful distance. Well, on the second trip, he saw a British ship called the Queen Elizabeth in the distance. Instead of passing at a respectful distance, he goes right up towards the Queen Elizabeth, blows his horn, and then guns it. And he tells the New York Times, "Oh, there was no race to the Queen Elizabeth. We just raced away from her." He was called up by U.S. Lines and promptly fired. Now, the ship is in service from 1952 to 1969, and during this time, she carries almost, so many celebrities, royalty, you name it. John Wayne is shown here on the bridge with her second captain, Commodore John W. Anderson. Salvador Dali, the famous artist, is shown here in the first-class ballroom. And unlike today's cruise ships, the SS United States was a transatlantic liner. People took this ship to get from point A to point B. They weren't just going just for fun. Sometimes they were going on vacation. But often you had businessmen going to Europe on trips. You had a lot of immigrants traveling tourist class who were coming over from Europe. Europe was still in ruins after World War II. So you had thousands of people who decided, you know what, I want to start a new life in America. I'm going to book passage on the SS United States. For many immigrants from England, from Germany, from Italy, this ship was their first taste of America. One person I spoke to, she is a student in Philadelphia, and she said, "My grandparents met on the SS United States when they were immigrating over from Germany, and they got married." So there are many stories like that. And also, this ship would travel across the Atlantic during winter, which was the absolute worst time to go across the Atlantic. She would run into hurricanes, she'd run into gales. You'd have water breaking over the ship's bow. That's about 70 feet above the water. So imagine having a 70-foot wall of water coming towards you. Pretty terrifying. And here she is being caked in ice after one of those terrible storms. But another story with the SS United States is very important to remember. This ship would carry 2,000 passengers, but she also was home for almost 1,000 men and women who worked on board her, many of whom were from New Jersey. Joseph Rhoda on the right was born in Bergen County, New Jersey, and a lot of crew members would live in New Jersey and then work on board the ship. Bill Krudner was a steward on the maiden voyage, and I think it's important to remember that although the ship carried a lot of the rich and famous, she also was the home, the college, the high school, and livelihood for many, many men and women who were away from their families for weeks at a time to work on board the SS United States, the greatest ocean liner flying the American flag. They forged lifelong friendships. They played other crews from other ocean liners in darts and baseball. So for them, this was like their high school. These crews that worked on these ocean liners genuinely loved these ships. But in October of 1958, after the SS United States had been in service for only 6 years, the first commercial jet plane takes off from an airport near New York called Idlewild, which is now known as JFK Airport, took off and landed in Paris 6 hours later. Now, some people thought, well, some people will take the ship one way and the jet plane the other way. There had been propeller-driven planes that had been going across the Atlantic since the early 30s. They were bumpy, they were uncomfortable. People didn't like them. Well, the jet plane changes everything. It's smoother, it's cheaper, it's faster, and more comfortable. By the early 1960s, ships like the SS United States are carrying maybe originally they could carry 2,000 passengers. By the early to mid-60s, they're now only carrying maybe 400 or 500 in 3 classes and then 1,000 crew members. As one captain of a British ship said, by that time, the ocean liners were disappearing so quickly, being sent to the scrapyard, you didn't even have time to say goodbye to them. They just went. In September of 1967, William Francis Gibbs, who had greeted the ship every time she came into New York, called up the captain every day. This ship was his baby. He absolutely loved this ship. He dies, and 2 years later, the SS United States is taken out of service after only 17 years. The United States government said, we're not subsidizing this ship anymore. We don't need her to carry troops to war anymore should war break out. We're now flying our troops to Vietnam and to occupied Europe. We don't need this ship anymore. Well, the company that operated her said, well, we can't afford to maintain her anymore if you're not giving us money. So they take her out of service, and she is laid up and basically mothballed in Newport News, Virginia. She has never sailed under her own power again. She has been sold many times. She has been stripped. She has not been painted since 1969. And here is the ship that was once described as the most beautiful in the world, the pride of America, now sitting in Philadelphia, where she's been since 1996, a rusted, gutted shell of her former self. All of her furniture has been sold. She has been stripped down to bare metal. All that really remains of her is her hull and the engines. I've been on board the SS United States several times. It's definitely a very sad experience. This is the first class ballroom up on the upper right. And this is a space where I can't imagine thinking this is where my grandparents danced 50 years ago. This is also the same space where on a crossing in 1959, the band leader announced, we have a very special treat. He announced this to the people who were dancing in the ballroom. Duke Ellington and his orchestra are on tour. This is one of the greatest jazz musicians ever produced. Duke Ellington and his orchestra are on tour, and they would like to play for your dancing pleasure. This is the sort of ship she was. The ship's contents have been scattered to the four winds. And the ship was almost sold for scrap 3 years ago. She was rescued in July 2012 when a very wealthy Philadelphian called Jerry Lenfest contributed $5.8 million for a nonprofit group called the SS United States Conservancy to purchase the ship and come up with plans for her to be redeveloped as a stationary attraction, very much like the USS Intrepid across the river from us in New Jersey, as a hotel, convention center, and museum. This is what could have happened to the SS United States. This is an ocean liner called the SS Norway being broken up and along India. It's not a pretty sight, and I think to lose the SS United States would be losing an irreplaceable part of our national heritage. It would be as if the Brooklyn Bridge was taken down. It would be like Grand Central Station being taken down. This is something that cannot be replicated. And this was the creation of someone who spent a lifetime, 40 years, wanting to do something spectacular, wanting to do something out of the ordinary, and something beautiful for his country. It comes from a time when we could build the finest, fastest, most beautiful ocean liner in the world, a true marvel of technology and beauty, and name her the SS United States. That is a recording of her whistle that William Francis Gibbs tuned personally out in the New Jersey Meadowlands. He was so obsessed with the ships being perfect that he would take the whistles out to the New Jersey Meadowlands and tune it with a pitchfork. That shows the amount of pride and the amount of craftsmanship that went into building this ship. My next book will be going back 150 years to the California Gold Rush in a time when we were trying to build also the fastest ships in the world, the great clipper ships that sailed around Cape Horn during the Gold Rush. Thank you so much. It's been a real privilege being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Ujifusa. We appreciate you coming here today. We do have a little special gift for you on behalf of Tenafly High School.
Thank you so much.
So much for
Appreciate
coming here
it.
today.
Thank you.
If you guys, thank you very much. Do we have any time? Do we have time for some questions here? A little bit? A couple questions. Questions from the audience. Raise your hand and we'll call on you. Questions about the ship, questions about writing a book, questions about William Francis Gibbs, the architect. We have a question, okay. Did someone predict that the ship was unsinkable? The Titanic or the United States? Okay, I guess we're, did someone think that the Titanic was unsinkable?
That's a very good question. The Titanic was built 40 years before the SS United States, and the owners of the Titanic, the White Star Line, never actually claimed the ship was unsinkable, but a prominent magazine described the Titanic and her two sisters as being practically unsinkable. Well, White Star, the company that owned the Titanic, was more than happy just to accept that. As you might know from the movie or your readings on it, the Titanic had 16 watertight compartments, any 2 of which could be flooded, or the first 4 of them. Well, she sideswiped that iceberg. That opened the first 5, and there was no way the Titanic could have stayed afloat. The United States had watertight bulkheads or walls that reached all the way up the hull, and that allowed any 5 of her 20 to be flooded. No one actually claimed the SS United States was unsinkable. They learned a lesson by then never to describe a ship as unsinkable.
We do have a second question.
How did you get such passion for ships?
That's a very good question. Well, I first heard about these ships from my grandmother, who traveled on many of the great liners in the 1950s and 60s, along with my grandfather. And for me, I heard about this when I was a very young kid. And for me, what I find fascinating about them is that they are so complex. They require so much attention to detail. It's kind of like building a cathedral in a way. It's like building something that's meant to last forever, something that's built to be beautiful, something that could take the punishment of the North Atlantic, which is an extremely treacherous, dangerous ocean, and also how they are embodiments of national creativity. The thing that really I find incredible even today, 60 years after the ship was built, was how much passion, how much attention to detail has to go into building a ship like this. And if anything is wrong with the ship, the North Atlantic will let the designer know if there's something wrong with it. Things do go wrong. So it's that attention to perfection that I find fascinating.
Thank you very much. Any other questions before we depart for today? One more question? The question was about the progress of the Conservancy?
Well, right now the Conservancy is talking to developers in New York. And right now there's a very tight timeline. Jerry Lenfest's funding is close to run out right now. And if there is not a major real estate deal in a couple of months, the ship will get sold for scrap. Right now the Conservancy has launched a funding campaign that allows people to, in the same way that people contributed to the saving of Ellis Island 40 years ago, people can go online to savetheunitedstates.org and share their pictures, share their stories of the ship, and purchase sections of the ship, of a virtual digital ship, and create a really unique piece of history. And there's so many people, it's amazing how many people have come out of the woodwork who have a connection to the ship. It's kind of like, imagine kind of a floating Facebook where people can share their stories and pictures of the ship.
Thank you very much. One more question?
About William Francis Gibbs' interest in classical music and the type of music he was interested in and how that relates to ships.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. Gibbs loved symphonic music. He loved classical music. He was an unabashed nerd through and through to the end of his life. But he felt that composing an opera, a symphony, is very similar to building a great ocean liner, just the amount of components it takes to have everything work together. And he would later tell the crew, after that first voyage, you guys performed just like a symphony orchestra, 1,000 people making this ship operate perfectly.
Thank you very much. How about a round of applause for Mr. Ujifusa today? When I found out that Mr. Ujifusa was coming here, I was really thrilled.
He really opened a lot of people's eyes to an issue, which is the potential scrapping of this historic ship.
Great to have the author come in and talk about, the different life of the creator of the ship and, the ship's fate now, how it's awaiting, if it might be scrapped or if it'll continue to be preserved as a historical memento.
I thought that Mr. Ujifusa did a wonderful job telling the students and staff about America's history in passenger ships.
Mr. Ujifusa gave a really interesting talk. I don't think anyone's really heard of William Francis Gibbs or the SS United States before.
And it was really fascinating to learn about the SS United States, and a little bit sad to realize that it could be near the end for her too.
Again, by hearing him talk, I could hear, just as people really have a passion for music, he had a passion for these ships.
It's important as a society to remember that we can build things as great and as wonderful as the United States, and we should preserve that.
Well, I thought it was really interesting to learn all about the creator of the ship and the ship's architecture.
The talk has inspired me to want to build something with longevity, just so that it can be appreciated through future generations, just as the SS United States is.
Cruise ships today, as many people know, are built in foreign countries, and we haven't done this for a very long time, and it would be good to remember this chapter.
I would have loved to travel on an ocean liner, especially one like that at the time, which was so new, such a new concept. Especially, it was much more efficient. I think it must have been great.
It's a very grand thing. It's really big, and it's just the whole thing as a whole really comes out as that kind of beautiful thing.
Personally, I think that it would make a great landmark in New York or Florida.
I think that the possibility that the United States could come to New York is a great idea.
Preserving the culture of America and just the ship as a whole is really just nice to have as a memento of everything.
We really need to preserve this chapter of our country's history.